Welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball news and discussion. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Podcast on the Brink is a joint production of the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. For complete coverage of IU basketball, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com. Break through and come check out IU football in the month of October. The Hoosiers host Charleston Southern on Saturday, October 7th at 3:30 p.m., and the Hoosiers host the University of Michigan on Saturday, October 14th at 12 p.m. for homecoming. Two great chances in October to catch some IU football at beautiful Memorial Stadium. And don't forget, youth tickets are only $10. Visit iuhoosiers.com for more information. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, we go back to our tour of the Big Ten Conference as we continue to analyze Indiana's conference foes for the upcoming 2017-18 season. Our guest this week is Roman Stubbs, who covers the University of Maryland for the Washington Post. Obviously, the Terps are faced with the task of replacing Melo Trimble this year, but they have three terrific freshmen from last year who are now sophomores. Are those guys ready for the challenge of more leading roles this year? We talk with Roman about that and much more on this week's edition as we analyze the Maryland Terrapins on Podcast on the Brink. Hey, real quick, a word about this week's sponsor, SeatGeek. Buying tickets to sports and concerts can be complicated, but there is a better, simpler way to buy with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to live events because with SeatGeek's seamless mobile experience, you can buy and sell tickets in just 2 taps. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There really is nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have SeatGeek on my phone, and it's by far the easiest way that I've found to shop for tickets. I can be anywhere, and like I just mentioned, with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats to anything that I want to go to. I actually used SeatGeek to buy tickets earlier this year to see Yogi play here in Dallas. I bought my wife concert tickets for the summer. So SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. They save you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find amazing deals. Now, here's how to get an even better deal, which is Podcast on the Brink listeners get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. Download the SeatGeek app, enter the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K today, and you'll get $20 back from SeatGeek. That's promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K. And now, on with this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink. And we are joined on this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink by Roman Stubbs, who covers the University of Maryland for the Washington Post. Roman, thank you for taking the time this week. It's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
So before we look ahead to the team that Maryland's going to be putting on the floor for the opening season, I do want to ask you just about the FBI investigation that has obviously fans of big-time college basketball teams everywhere a little on edge. Now, Maryland, like Indiana, has not been named in any of the reports, so far so good for both of us. And in fact, as of yet, Under Armour, who Maryland has its apparel deal with, they haven't even been mentioned in any of the media reports, at least that I've read, as being part of the investigation, although I think everyone kind of assumes that Adidas, Nike, and Under Armour, were engaging in shenanigans of various degrees. I'm curious how Maryland has responded, if at all, just to the general reports of the investigation, and do you get any type of sense that there's any worry or anything about the future of where the FBI investigation may go?
Yeah, I think, obviously Maryland hasn't had any kind of response. I think, I think you're seeing a lot of schools go down that road where, if they're not being challenged on this or if they're not being confronted on this, they're certainly not going to, they're certainly not going to broach it. I think if obviously if there is contact with the investigation and if Maryland has reason to believe that maybe they would be contacted, I would assume the school would try to get out in front of that. But definitely a really interesting week. Obviously, we're going to have more media events with the program here coming up throughout the month. First Big Ten Media Day, I think, is on the 19th. And then obviously, school will have its own media day later in the month. I think it's on Halloween. So they're going to have to address it. Not that I think that there's anything there at this point or down the road. It's just something that I think every program, major program especially, is going to have to address. And as you mentioned, it's going to be interesting to see if Under Armour gets entangled in this thing. And obviously it seems at this point it's been more focused on Nike and Adidas, which is interesting. But again, I think it's a whole culture, and I wouldn't be surprised, if any shoe company out there is kind of had experience with this. So it's going to be definitely an interesting season, and we'll see what Maryland's response, what Mark Turgeon's response to it is when they have to finally talk publicly, later this month.
Yep. So looking ahead to the team that Maryland's going to be putting on the floor this season, really the major storyline kind of revolves around last year's three outstanding freshmen, Anthony Cowan, Justin Jackson, Kevin Herter, each of whom, I was kind of surprised to see this, they all played at least 70% of the team's minutes last year and logged an offensive rating of 105.7 or higher, which is impressive for anyone, but especially impressive for three freshmen. Do you think these three guys are ready to take steps forward as sophomores, and do they need to for Maryland to be a Big Ten contender?
Yeah, I think obviously they will. It was really interesting last year just to see kind of the whole landscape of freshmen across college basketball, and there's so many good players that these three guys kind of until Jackson, I guess, popped up on the NBA radar at the end of the year. These three guys were relatively kind of just under the radar, but they were so productive. And Maryland had so many questions going into the year. I don't think they expected these three to be as productive as they were. And I think there's just a couple of interesting, storylines with these three, heading into the year. Obviously, Cowan he's kind of the Melo Trimble era parent. He's going to have to kind of, he played point last year a lot, mainly their point guard, but he's going to have to kind of step out of kind of the shadow of Melo and kind of carry the team. And I think probably expand his scoring role a little bit more. Herter, I think, he's added a lot of weight. I think he's up 15 pounds. Obviously that'll probably shed by February. It's a long year, but he's a guy who I kind of expect to have a kind of a breakout year. You saw spurts last year where he was just a brilliant scorer, probably their best long range shooter. But he's a guy who, he's got a mid range game. He can get to the rim. He won a couple games off of defensive plays. So, he's good. And then Jackson obviously is their NBA prospect. A guy who I would expect to be gone after this year. And, he's going to have a lot more expectation on him this year. But I think with the guys they have coming in, Bruno Fernando, this highly touted freshman they have coming in, kind of this angle and a power forward prospect who, is kind of been raved about a lot throughout the offseason. I think he's going to allow Jackson to play a little bit more at his natural position at the three. He'll be that stretch four type guy. Fernando will be, and so it'll allow Jackson to play on the perimeter more and not have to, carry as much down low. So kind of three intriguing players that will kind of be the core of that roster this year for sure.
Roman, specifically when it comes to Justin Jackson, he came to Maryland as a highly touted recruit. He wasn't a 5-star kid by any means. He was a top 50 kid. And all of a sudden, he gets invited to the draft combine. And now I've seen, some mock drafts, which don't mean a whole lot, but they're fun to talk about this time of year, of him going as high as the top 10 in next year's draft. I mean, what did you see watching him last year that maybe kind of led to him being regarded as this NBA prospect? And what do you think he got out of the whole process of going to the draft combine last year after his freshman year?
Yeah, I think just reading. I've talked to a few scouts about him, and just reading, just generally. obviously the 7'3" wingspan is really enticing, and they scouts love the fact that he can step out and shoot so well on the perimeter for a guy his size. So I think when you combine that length with that shooting ability, you can just envision him in the NBA with the way the NBA is being played now. He's just kind of that, he would fit perfectly just with his athleticism and just his shooting ability. But I think that was a kind of a concern with going to the combine. He's got to get better defensively. I think his lateral quickness needs to get better. I think he needs to add strength. I think those were all things that he really benefited from going to the combine and kind of getting feedback. But I don't think it was out of the realm that he would have been a possible late first round pick this year, maybe early second. You never know, I guess. But I think he was hearing a lot of different things. You guys know how the draft works, I guess. But
right.
I think this year, it's hard to imagine he'd be a top 10 pick. But again, like if he becomes a star, if he has a breakout year, and then he kind of, he stays healthy and he kind of, shows improvement in all those areas, and he's a perfect fit for somebody in the lottery. He's got those really intriguing kind of attributes that not a lot of players, I think, in college basketball have. So he's definitely going to be fun to watch.
Beyond those three, I think, overall, I think Maryland, might be a little overlooked going into the season because people see, Melo Trimble's gone, how are they going to replace him? And obviously these three players are a big piece of the puzzle. But beyond that, I look at Maryland's roster and I say there's some guys on this team that with the potential to really give them, a fourth, fifth option, some good depth off the bench. Who are maybe one or two guys that you are looking at going into the season where you say this guy has to really play a lot better for Maryland to reach his potential? I mean, off the top of my head, I know Dion Wiley was a guy who came in with a lot of accolades and really has struggled with injuries last year. I know his freshman year he had a decent role, and then obviously the center position with Michael Tchaikovsky, and I think that's how you say his name. I know he was also injured towards the end of last year, and that kind of coincided with a backward slide for Maryland. But those two guys are kind of come to mind. I know and you mentioned Fernando, and I know they have a freshman by the name of Daryl Morsel who's highly regarded too. But if you had to say who are one or two guys coming into the season that you really think need to take a step forward for this team to reach its potential?
Yeah, I would definitely say, from everything I've heard, I think Fernando is going to surprise a lot of people. I think he's going to be terrific. I would imagine, they might ease him in, non-conference play. The starter role isn't, we saw that with Diamond Stone a couple of years ago. They kind of made him the sixth man until Big Ten play started. So I could just see him starting though from day one, that type of talent that he has. But I think Tchaikovsky is a huge piece for them. I think you look at last year where things kind of fell apart for them. They go to Wisconsin in late February and they're tied for, the lead in the Big Ten, and he gets hurt. And they just weren't the same. And I think all year long they just dealt with so many injuries in the front court that it became overwhelming at the end of the year. So he's a guy who's got a lot of talent. I think he was a guy who, when he was recruited here, they thought maybe he'd be a two and done type guy. It hasn't quite worked out that way, but I think he's got a lot of ability, a lot of strength added. If he can stay healthy and kind of blossom at that 5 spot, there's no telling, how good this team could be. And then Wiley, I think you hit it on the head. It hasn't lived up to the expectations of coming in that 14 class. Obviously, he's got so much talent. He's had some bad luck with injuries. I think if you look at their guards, I think they just need him to kind of come into his own this year. That he just would add another dimension, I think, for them without Trimble, without the scoring that they're going to have from Trimble. I don't know how productive of a scorer Cowan's going to be yet. Morsel's probably going to be their best perimeter defender, but he's going to be a freshman and not really relied upon to score a lot, I'm assuming. So, yeah, Wiley's going to be incredibly important, and they need better shooting out of Nickens, and so there's a lot of guys who, we're going to kind of see if they can take the next step, and I think that's going to be the difference between Maryland being the middle of the pack in the Big Ten and potentially a top 3-4 team in the Big Ten. So we'll see. We'll see if that group can kind of do that.
Roman, this strikes me as a really interesting season for head coach Mark Turgeon, who it's his 7th season. He got off to a bit of a slow start in those first 3 years, losing at least 13 games each of those seasons. But over the last 3, the Terps have won at least 12 conference games. They've made the NCAA tournament each year, won a total of 3 tourney games. Does the success over the past few years have him on pretty solid footing right now with the administration and fans, or is there a sense that Maryland should have achieved even more with the talent that they've had over the last few years, and now, without a guy like Melo Trimble, this is, kind of back to another show-me season for Mark Turgeon?
Yeah, I think he's definitely on solid footing. I mean, I think he got not that a contract extension is always an indicator that of job security, what have you, but he got a pretty nice extension last October, I believe. And I think he's been rewarded for kind of turning the corner, like you said. I think year 4, that first year they entered the Big Ten, there was definitely questions of, he was on the hot seat. And so they've had postseason success. I think 2 years ago they had that Final Four type caliber roster, and I think they went to Sweet 16, but they underachieved. And then last year, I think a lot of people, kind of, assume they overachieved just because the freshmen were so good when they weren't expected to be. But you definitely hear things about, whether Turgeon's the guy to take them to the next step, to get them back to kind of that 2001 glory, this program being a national title contender year in and year out. But I would say that one thing that he really has going for him is, the 2018 class. And they're lining up to have, they already got 2 top 40 kids, and they're lining up to have a potential top 10, top 5 class, depending on how, the next month or 2 shakes out on the recruiting trail with a couple of their prospects, targets. So, they're definitely in the running to kind of have maybe a national title contender next year. I think that would be a stretch to think that they can make a run this year, but you never know. So I think when you look at everything, I think Turgeon's on solid ground, and it's just going to be interesting to see, within the next couple of years, whether that remains the case and whether he's the guy who, can get them to kind of national prominence again.
Roman, you mentioned Big Ten Media Day coming up later in the month, and all the preseason magazines are starting to hit the shelves, and everybody's kind of predicting how the Big Ten's going to shake out this coming season. I'm curious, from your perspective, everyone is probably going to pick Michigan State to win the league, but beyond that, to me, Maryland is a team that could be right there in that next group. How are you kind of viewing, maybe the top tier of the Big Ten this year, and beyond that? I mean, would you agree with the assessment that a lot of people have at this point that the middle of the pack really seems more wide open than ever?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, I think 3 years ago when Maryland was, I think they were like picked, it was an informal poll. They were picked like 8th or 9th. And I don't think they're going to be that low this year. I'm horrible with projections and things of that nature. I think obviously Michigan State, is the favorite. Miles Bridges is the real deal. And I think they're going to be loaded again this year, obviously. But I think, a team like Iowa, for example, maybe not getting a lot of, love right now, but a team that you look at that roster and the games they won last year, they could definitely be good. A team like Penn State, could be dangerous. Obviously Purdue's going to be up there. There's questions about Wisconsin. There's questions about Michigan. But I think Maryland, you look at, you just look at, that roster and you wonder why maybe they're not getting as much, maybe as much, a love as a Minnesota or a Purdue, or I don't know. I see them being in that top four, kind of heading into the final, 3 or 4 weeks of the season, having a shot to have a top 2 or top 3 seed in the tournament. I think with all the talent, if they can stay healthy, you have the 3 sophomores. I think they're going to be right there, but for sure, the middle of the Big Ten is going to be really, really strong this year, and it's definitely going to be fun to watch.
Last question for you, Roman. I'm sitting here thinking about this. We're talking about Maryland and the Big Ten, previewing them as a conference foe for Indiana, which kind of seemed weird the last few years, and it doesn't really seem weird now. Like, it kind of seems like Maryland is, just kind of a part of the Big Ten now. It seems a lot more seamless.
Yeah.
What's the feeling in Maryland? I mean, among fans and even just people in the program, is it, does it kind of feel now like they're a Big Ten team and that transition is done, or is there still any weirdness there?
I don't think the transition's done at all. I think there's still a weirdness there. I mean, I think obviously it's going to be a while before Maryland finds that natural rival, if that ever happens. But I think, you look at the road trips and you'll always hear comments about, having to go to like West Lafayette or Champaign or some of these. I mean, but, when you look at, the attendance figures, I think Maryland's been the top 10 nationally in attendance the last few years. And you look at some of these crowds when Wisconsin comes, or Indiana or Michigan State. I mean, they draw, not that they wouldn't sell out anyway, but they just draw that buzz. They draw, they have that big time college basketball atmosphere. So I think people are really respectful of kind of the tradition and just how good some of these programs are. But it's to play Carolina and Duke and, UVA and all these teams for so many years, and have the ACC kind of so ingrained into the basketball culture here. I just think it's going to take a while for people just to become totally used to it. To become totally used to going and watching great Minnesota Maryland basketball games, or Minnesota Iowa games, or Maryland Iowa games. I mean, it's doesn't roll off the tongue quite yet, in my opinion. But another year this year, and with the tourney in New York, it'll give more East Coasters a chance to go, and we'll see how the expansion kind of rolls on.
Yeah, Indiana's probably been about as good a rival for Maryland as anyone. I mean, the games that those two teams
those have been
great
games.
Yeah. So
yeah, those have been great games. So yeah, for sure. And football is just as interesting. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But I think the transition process is definitely still in progress. And although I think there's been inroads made, and people are starting to definitely warm towards their new reality at the Big Ten.
Yeah, Jerod, I would say one thing, the reason maybe it feels more normal for Big Ten fans, and specifically Indiana basketball fans, for Maryland as a Big Ten team now, is because you look at the expansion of the Big Ten over the years. Penn State, Nebraska, and Rutgers are the other teams that have been brought in, and none of those schools bring anything close to what Maryland brings to the table from a basketball perspective. So I think from Indiana's perspective, I think Maryland coming to the league was a great thing. As you mentioned, those games have been terrific. They have a passionate fan base. I've been there for both games that Indiana has played in College Park. Both have been terrific atmospheres, and I think from a basketball perspective, I think Maryland brings a ton to the conference. So I think it's cool to have them in the league.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're always going to have the ACC loyalists and, the old guard but definitely I think, it's good basketball, and it's been fun for me to cover. I mean, I started the first year they were in the league, and, I love the Big Ten towns and getting, it's always really weird to go to like Piscataway, State College.
We don't count them. But, we don't count Rutgers yet. They're still on probation for us.
But there's definitely been some fun games, and hopefully they can find a rival. So.
Well, this has been great, Roman. We really appreciate your insight on Maryland.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
I expect the Maryland-Indiana matchups this year will be just as entertaining as the ones in the past have been. So we look forward to those. Thanks for joining us.
Yep. Yeah,
Thank you, Roman.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, guys. Yeah, have a good one, guys.
Take care.
Take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. To get more from me and from Alex, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana University basketball. If you liked this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who loves IU basketball as much as you do. You can also support the show by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, which helps us get the word out to more IU fans like yourself. We'll be back next week with another brand new episode. Until then, as always, go Hoosiers.